Welcome to today's edition of Your Questions Answered with Father Gruner. I'm John Veneri. This program, I think you know, we take your questions that you send to us via email. Father Gruner answers them. We talk about them. Continue to send us your questions at questions. Here's the email address, bottom of the screen, questions@thefatimacenter.com. We had a question today, and I'll just read it. It says, why has it become the norm to build ugly modern structures, he's talking about churches, that don't resemble churches at all, and this is often done next to existing beautiful churches and basilicas to accommodate more pilgrims these days?
Well, they might be talking about something like Our Lady of Guadalupe shrine, for example.
Yes, this big...
but it's not just in Mexico.
It's been done at Lourdes. Yeah. It's been done at Fatima.
Yes.
These huge... what they really look like is concrete bunkers. I mean, the one in Guadalupe almost looks like a huge aquarium.
And the one in Fatima is what you call the banjo, I think.
Yeah. It's so I called it the $50 million eyesore is what I call it. But
it's actually 95 million.
95 million by the time, and that's euros, which is more dollars than.
I think they did it in Los Angeles also, if I'm not mistaken, as well. But.
Yeah, well, part of what we know about a church is that it's supposed to. Everything in the church is supposed to be a reflection of heaven. And this is why when we go into church and when the church is built properly, when people learn to behave properly, when you walk into church, you're elevated.
Yes.
Everything is soaring upwards to heaven, especially the Gothic cathedrals and things like that. Everything took you up to heaven, and it was a kind of a reflection of heaven on earth.
Yes.
And this were architects and men who had the faith and who built to really focus on the majesty of God himself. Even if you would go into the more, I was in a Benedictine Monastery in France, and it was very austere. It didn't have a lot of decorations, but it still had that majesty. It's God's house. But what's happened in modern times is a kind of idea of function over beauty, and function over what the church should be, and also a kind of a modernist spirit that takes us away from focusing on God and focusing more on each other.
Well, there's all that. I mean, first of all, I think we have two questions we hear. One is ugly modern structures. I mean, you might ask that in general, but ugly modern structures in a lot of things, not just in churches. And that, I think, is an indication of the age. But I think...
Yeah, actually, I think there was a great Roman in the 4th century who said, we build what we are.
Yes.
So the architecture is going to be a reflection of who we are. And if we have a lot of ugly architecture in the 20th and 21st century, it is a reflection of who we've become, which is scary.
Yeah, well, that's, I think the first thing. So that is a reflection of the culture because, and our culture, a lot of people say we're in the greatest age and all the rest of it. We may have great technology and whatnot, but we're not certainly in the greatest age. We've had 2 world wars, and a lot of other little wars. We've killed 1/7 of our population in abortion just in the last 30 years. So the architecture has to reflect the ugliness of our soul of this age. We are living, according to some, in the great apostasy. Mm-hmm. That is the rebellion against God, in which the vast majority of people are going to go to hell unless they turn around and repent before it's too late. And that time is coming. But the second thing is the ugliness in our churches. Our churches should, despite the ugliness of the age, the churches should have some
take us away from it.
Yes. Yeah. But even there, some of it is I don't know, the age, and some of it is no doubt. Obviously, our church leaders don't have lost. It shows what the clergy, the priests, the bishops, the cardinals, the popes have accepted. You have that awful monstrosity that Paul VI put up for his audience hall. Mm-hmm. It shows what was in his mind and his heart. I mean, that he thought it was a great thing.
Yes,
he's either too affected by the cultural part, and he was not enough resisting it in himself that he thought it was a great thing. But it's not only him, and
a lot of the modern architecture is theory driven. That they come up with this crazy theory and then make the architecture to go along with it. Modern art is the same way. They'll have one little theory, and then only if you know the theory do you look at this otherwise meaningless canvas and say, wow, he got the theory right. Yeah. It's kind of a snobbery and a Gnosticism there. Yeah. Tom Wolfe blew it wide open. And the same thing in architecture. And so many Catholics will walk into, say, that new monstrosity at Fatima and just say, what is this?
Yes.
It looks like a huge UN meeting hall. The corpus on the crucifix, meaning no disrespect, our Lord's face is Neanderthal. And what we see is, and this is very scary in the church, the absence of any beauty whatsoever. And if there's one thing that Catholicism gives in its architecture, in its rites, is beauty and ennobling of soul.
Well, in fact, St. Thomas points out that there, and in fact, Pope Francis, one of his first speeches, spoke about, there's truth, there's goodness, and there's beauty. These are three ways of going to God. And the beautiful is all beauty comes from God, all truth comes from God, all goodness comes from God. And some people are attracted more to God's goodness, some are attracted more to God's truth, some are attracted more to God's beauty. But certainly our architecture should reflect the beauty of God. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's only human architecture. It's a small, but it shouldn't be reflecting ugliness of anything. And that's the thing that you have actually ugliness in Catholic, so-called Catholic architecture. That's really
and two last points about that. I remember reading something from Pius XII, Pope Pius XII. I don't remember where he said it, but he warned his bishops. I think it was in the 40s or 50s. He said, never have a non-Catholic design your church. And it was very interesting the way he put it. He said, because the non-Catholic lacks the inner eye of the faith. You try to explain, we've had good people, you try to explain the Catholic point to them, and they just don't see it.
They don't get it.
They don't have the inner eye.
And they're quite intelligent.
They're quite intelligent, and they're of goodwill,
yeah.
But they don't see it. Never have a non-Catholic design your church. And when we have this ascension of modernism within the church, we have people who call themselves Catholics who no longer have a Catholic spirit.
Yes.
And they're then, as a result, they're giving us ugly rites, ugly vestments,
yes. and
ugly churches.
Yes. So. Yes. And so that's. We could speak. I'm sure.
Yeah.
A lot more
we better wrap this up. But so it is a kind of disorientation,
it's a diabolic
disorientation, and we have to look for those churches that really have the beauty and the majesty of God. That's.
You see, the idea that there's our three enemies of our soul: the world, the flesh, and the devil. But the world, but you have people after Vatican II saying, before we had to have a wall around and protect ourselves, but now we have to break that down wall. That's Balthasar and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And so you have the Catholic clergy who have now abandoned the guidelines. And they're taking the world's guidelines for their architecture and everything else. This is a punishment from God.
Yes.
That the worst punishment God can give us is to give us bad clergy. And these ugly churches are a blasphemy in stone against God, and we're giving them by the Catholic clergy. They're not the architects, but they're the ones commissioning them.
And they reflect the new theology too, because I remember reading in Romano Omerio that one of the reasons the modern architects in the churches have taken away the communion rail, because the old churches had a sanctuary, which was the sacred space, but they take away the communion rail to introduce the idea that everything is sacred. There is no sacred space.
So, and that becomes nothing is sacred.
Nothing is sacred, and it kind of opens the door for a kind of pantheism. But we're over time, and we'll talk about more in the next program. Thank you.